Okay, guys. Hello, hello. Good morning. How's it going? Okay, I have to say, I really, really enjoy the 9 a.m. start time. Anybody else? Okay, that is not as enthusiastic as I thought. Anyway, okay, we have a special treat, guys. Representative John Curtis. Give him a
Hello.
round of applause. So I'll give a little background, but then I want John to do or Representative Curtis to do most of the talking here. So Representative Curtis was the mayor of Provo for how long?
8 years.
Yeah, I think the entire time I was in college. So he's awesome, and I only got a
8 years
bachelor. I only got a bachelor degree. I don't know what happened. Most people are dentists or surgeons by then. Well, let's just start there. What give us a little bit of your background before politics, and then I think we got a bunch of questions, but I think people would really like to know what prompted you to get into politics in the first place, why mayor of Provo, and then we'll go from there. How about that?
Awesome.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for letting me be here with you. I'm looking around, and this is why I like this this demographic, because I see in you this brightness, this sharpness, this future, and I'm actually gonna. Can I part from your question for just a second?
Away.
Just to tell you one thing to give you an appreciation. So when I was in college at BYU, I had my first laptop ever, and you guys will get a kick out of this. It was a TRS-80 made by Radio Shack. It had 64K of memory, and I had upgraded that from 32K, and it ran on 4 AA batteries. And this is what's funny is I was embarrassed to take that into my BYU class because it seemed like I was being pretentious. Seriously.
Did you have to change the batteries like every 30 minutes?
They actually, because it was the screen was like this big. It was this little black and white screen, and they would go, a week or so. And so I share that with you because there's this massive enviness from me for you and what you have. And I just often think about, wow, if I'd have had what you had when I was going to college and coming out of college, just really jealous. And I just love hanging around with you. I want you to know in Washington, D.C., that I lay claim to being a millennial. And I knew that you were going to laugh. But in my opinion, it's more a state of a mind than it is an age. And so I like to claim to be that. And I hope you'll allow me that. So I did a little traveling around and lived in different places and then came back to Utah. And I worked for other people, and I had this bug to be an entrepreneur. So I joined in with my cousin and another partner, and we had a company that built shooting ranges. And
Very Utah.
Very Utah, yeah. We designed and manufactured shooting ranges all over the world. And most people are stunned when they find out that when we sold that company, we were making $70 million of shooting ranges around the world. And we were in Provo, and our business was in Provo, and we just didn't feel welcome and felt like the city actually was against us. And so when we sold the business, I said, I think we can do better. I'm going to run for mayor of Provo. And was a tough campaign. I just barely won. People didn't know who I was. I'd had this business experience, but people wanted political experience. And so I won. And Provo, how many of you are from at least Utah Valley? Most of you. So Provo 10 years ago, I think to best articulate it, was kind of a little embarrassed about who we were. And what happened during that 8 years was, I think we became really proud of Provo and downtown Provo, the music scene, the entrepreneurial scene. And being part of that as mayor was one of the coolest things I've ever done in my life. And I just loved every minute of it. And of course, a lot of that was the entrepreneurial scene and tech startups. And one of the things I lamented the very most is how many businesses started in Provo and then moved to Lehi.
It is. It's sad. It's sad. It's sad. We are one of those. So Podium started in the spare bedroom of my apartment by the Riverwoods with my co-founder Dennis, and then we moved to Center Street above Canyon Bicycles. And I think you know that. And then eventually our EVP of marketing, Nico Dato, lived in North Salt Lake, and he was threatening to quit.
It's your fault.
So we had to move or else lose Nico.
Corey, get his license plate number. He's going to get a ticket on the way home.
For a split second, we convinced him to maybe move down to Alpine, but his wife wouldn't have it. So,
well, let me tell you this. I came to terms with this phenomenon this way, and that is that as a parent, when you have children, you want them to stay. You want them to stay right by you, but they don't. They go off into the world and they accomplish marvelous things. And I kind of view all these companies that started in Provo as children, right? And you're proud of them. And I've realized, unfortunately, that many of you, to accomplish what you need to accomplish, have to leave Provo. And so while I don't like it, I get it. And it actually makes me happy. And the only thing I ask is that you remember that you were born in Provo.
Yes. Awesome. Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, like, you were a huge celebrity. Like, I think most cities, the younger generation or the younger population don't even really know who the mayor is, but like everybody knew Mayor John Curtis.
So I loved being engaged in what the millennial generation was engaged in. I loved your businesses. Like I say, I was envious. I look at you with this great envy, and it was a compliment to me that I was welcome around you, if that makes sense. And so I just loved it. I loved seeing your successes. And I think probably what I missed the most in this new role is sometimes I feel really disconnected from that.
Yeah, I can see that. But cool thing is you're doing awesome things for us in Washington, and I'd love to hear, and I think everybody else would love to hear. So you were mayor, people loved you. You had this amazing track record. I remember I met you briefly. I don't think you remember it, but I met you briefly at the Iron Cowboy did a breakfast. This is like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And we met, and I went home and I said, "Honey, I met the mayor," and he shook my hand, and I think he really liked me. Anyway, so you had this awesome career as mayor, and what prompted you to run for Congress?
I had been mayor 8 years, and I feel like that politicians and athletes always stay one season too long, right? And they don't know when to quit. And
unless you're a BYU basketball player, then you declare for the draft after
you
one
leave too
season.
soon. Yeah. I just had this goal to leave on top of my game, and so I'd been mayor 8 years, and you have to decide: am I going to go 12 years? And I wasn't convinced that I could come in every day and love what I was doing for 4 more years. And so I said, I'm going to step aside, which was really hard on me. And I think even in my announcement video, when I said I wasn't going to run, I got like, oh, this is emotional, and because it was such a part of who I was. And so I was kind of anxious to get back into the private sector. I wanted to do what you guys do. I just love business and being engaged in it, and had kind of aspired to maybe start my own business again, and was looking forward to that. And there's a part of public service, as many good things as there are, the one part that's a little bit hard is you're just constantly in the public eye. And you feel like if Corey, my chief of staff's over there, knows that I will not jaywalk in Provo, because somebody's going to see me. They're going to take a picture, and it's going to be on social media, right? You just get no license to do anything. So I was really looking forward to kind of stepping out of that public eye. And Jason Chaffetz, my predecessor, surprisingly quit. There's a fun little story. I'll share it with you. I don't know how many of you know Owen Fuller, but Owen wanted me to run against Jason and started a GoFundMe page. And that was a little embarrassing for me because I knew Jason really well. It helped me a lot as mayor, and I didn't want to run against him. And so one night I got a phone call, and it was from Jason, and I saw the caller ID, and I said, oh, shoot, he's calling to get mad at me because he saw this GoFundMe page and he thinks I'm going to run against him. So I picked up the phone. I said, listen, Congressman, don't worry, I'm not going to run against you. And he kind of chuckled and he said, well, I've decided not to run again. And then kind of implied that he was going to step down midterm. I hung up the phone. I walked into the next room where my wife was, and I said, honey, did you feel the earth just move just a little bit? Because I just had this kind of premonition that this was going to impact me in a big way. So my wife and I went through a month-long evaluation process about, was this the right thing for us? And there was a day that was just overwhelmingly compelling, a strong feeling that I needed to jump in and do this and get involved. And I did. And I will tell you that it's been difficult. I don't mind telling you. The transition from being a mayor to a congressman was much more difficult than I expected. A mayor of Provo is unique because everybody wants you to be successful. The people are cheering for you, right? I mean, like when I met you, you just kind of feel like you're cheering for you. A congressman is, you get into this partisan world and at least half the people want you to fail. And people literally don't work like you do. They stay in their mother's basements and they troll you on Facebook and they say mean things and it's just really hard to navigate a partisan world. It's very different. And it's taken me a little while to get back on my feet.
How do you, I don't think we have that here, not as much as that, but I do think when you are successful and, you successfully got elected, I think when you're successful, people do kind of want you to fail. And it's not as partisan in the tech scene as it is in government, but like, I don't know if people out in the audience feel this way, but I do feel like the more successful we get, the more people kind of want to see you fail. And I guess for everybody here, how do you deal with that at your level? Because I think we all kind of go through that a little bit here.
It's really hard. At least I try to pretend like I've got this thick skin, like this doesn't bother me, but it does. And I hate to tell you this because I love social media. Social media was part of our success. I think being mayor of Provo. I don't read the comments anymore. They're just terrible. I don't know if you guys, look at them, but I can post something like, isn't it a beautiful day? And people will get on and see, we knew you were a bad guy and we knew that from the beginning that you were lousy and it's just really discouraging. And so I've got a team and I think another jump from being mayor to Congress is, although I had a really good team as mayor, you will absolutely fail in Congress without a good team, and you have to have them, and they're out there combing through those social media comments and helping you respond to them and helping navigate all these difficult issues. There's some tough national issues. I don't have to tell you guys right now that are very divisive, and navigating those in a way that represents Utah sometimes can be really difficult.
Awesome. I think we'll just get right into the questions.
You're sitting on them.
Which I'm sitting on. So we asked the entire company to ask some questions, and we got like 50. I don't think we're gonna get through all of them. And there are no softballs here, so I'm just gonna go. So first question is, what are the biggest obstacles for continuing growth of the tech industry in Silicon Slopes?
Well, I'm going to answer that kind of two ways. One is locally. And this is where I'll put maybe my mayor's hat on. There are not enough of you to keep growing, enough qualified workers to keep this thing going. We've got to do a better job of training our youth. And I mean, let's admit it. I'm looking out across this audience and I don't see enough women, right?
Yep.
And we've got to figure out how to get my daughters, your daughters, interested. And that, I think, is a major impediment, is this flow of a workforce that's going to come into it. This congestion, all the things that we're experiencing here. People love Provo, they love Lehigh because you're this close to the mountains. They love the outdoors activities, but we get these darn inversions and the traffic, and it's just getting worse. And so from a local perspective, we've got to figure out how to build all these buildings that are coming in here and maintain the quality of life that all of you like so much. On a federal level, I would say that one of the things government is really good at is telling you how to run your business. And we have to find that fine line between regulation and micromanaging your businesses. There are colleagues of mine that would have everything regulate, everything from the temperature in your room to to who you hire and how you hire them and all of those things.
We can't even regulate the temperatures here in the building ourselves. So good
Well,
luck.
then
Good luck.
obviously this is why I need to come take over.
Yes. Yeah.
And tell you
We
that
can't
you're-
even keep our temperatures
tell you that
right.
you're getting this wrong. And so I think, the federal government has to figure out their role of appropriate regulation and over-regulation. And there's this constant battle in Washington, D.C., that going back and forth between too much regulation and then not enough regulation. And I think we've got to get that right in order not to stifle what you're doing right now.
Awesome. Awesome. Talking about inversion. So this is something that I didn't really care about until my wife and I had our first child. And then all of a sudden I was like, this is probably not good for babies to be like half the year in like this really bad air pollution. So I just don't even, I know this is not a problem that government can solve alone, but like, do we need to like switch to all electric vehicles or like, I just love your insight there.
Let me tell you, we did something in Provo that I really like. It was the Provo Clean Air Challenge. And we would get people to commit to certain very basic things. And you're going to smile and kind of get a kick out of this one because we just violated it as an office, right? We were over at Silicon Slopes meeting with Clint over there, and we had to hustle to be over here. And I started counting the cars that my staff had over there that we were going to bring over here. And I stopped counting at about 5 or 6, right? And we were in such a hurry. Guess what? We brought all 5 or 6 cars over here. Now, how many of you have seen this phenomenon in Utah? On a Sunday, a church building 2 blocks away, people drive to, okay? Now, it gets worse because not only that, but somebody like the Curtis family will take 4 cars 2 blocks away to church because it's a little inconvenient. And I believe at the heart of this, we're not going to improve this until as individuals, we start doing some of the most simplest things. Walking when we can walk, not idling, carpooling, some of those just very simple things. And I have a lot of colleagues that want to solve this by passing laws that force you as a business or other people to do certain things. And here again, we can have a discussion about that. But I believe until individually we make that commitment in ourselves, we're going to have inversions. Think about this. There's 500,000 people that live here in Utah County. On a bad inversion day, if every person reduced 1 vehicle trip per day, that's 500,000 vehicle trips reduced per day.
That's huge. Awesome. Awesome. Okay. Oh, this is the follow-up to the Silicon Slopes question. What, in your opinion, makes Silicon Slopes unique versus other Silicon X areas? Silicon Valley, what are some other ones? Beach, prairie, whatever.
We are the true Silicon. We're the. Let me tell you what makes us unique. I actually believe that just in our DNA, we're entrepreneurs, and we're smart, and we work harder than the other places work. I think part of our DNA is this Utah work ethic of we'll work hard. And so I think it's a combination of our roots, where we come from, our ancestors.
Ice machine.
Somebody wants some
We
ice.
usually turn them off, but apparently not today.
It's a combination of our roots, it's our intelligence, and it's our drive. And I think all of those things combine. And then I'll tell you something that I think we forget every once in a while, that we ought to look back and thank those early, when I say pioneers, I don't mean the pioneers that came across the plains. I mean those WordPerfect, those businesses that a couple of decades ago broke ground and broke through that ceiling here. Because in many companies, you can find little traces all the way back to WordPerfect.
Our CTO, Jason Taylor, stand up, JT. Did you work at WordPerfect? Wow, that was like 30 years ago.
What are you, 100? Are you 100 years old?
If so, he's Benjamin Button because he doesn't look a day over 35.
But you see my point. I think you can find threads back to those early entrepreneurs that were really successful, and I don't think we should underestimate the impact of that.
Yeah, and like even John, I had the opportunity to interview John Warnock, the founder of Adobe, and like if you think back to even earlier than that, you have the computer science program at the University of Utah. You have like the first meeting where they decided to make the internet happen in Utah, and like it is really cool. And I think people forget sometimes about that. You think they only think as far. I think we'll, especially. I mean, the average age at Podium is like 28. So you only think back kind of as far as like Omniture, but it goes back even further than that. It's a good reminder.
Right, and I think part of that is the reminder of the obligation that lands on your shoulders and all of your shoulders to give back and to keep this momentum going.
Awesome, awesome. Do you feel there's any value to the Mueller report beyond specific dealings with Russia? That's number 2. This is Brian Spittler's doing. He ordered them.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good question. I am asked frequently about that. And let me kind of address it in a much broader sense and then bring it down more specifically. Government has a terrible time investigating itself. Does that make sense? We're just not set up to investigate ourselves. So what does that mean? That means that the Attorney General who puts these special investigations together works for the president. So do you see a problem in that? So, but what are the options? Because all of law enforcement, all of that works for the president. You have separate branches of government, so you have Congress, and Congress also investigates the president, and we have. But let me ask you a question in your heads. You don't need to answer this, but if Republicans have the majority and we do an investigation of a Republican president, how many of you have confidence in that? Right? If the Democrats are in control and they do an investigation of a Republican president, how many of you have confidence in that? And my point is that if Congress is responsible for the investigation, it's going to be biased and political. And so you're stuck with the president investigating himself, in essence. And I think, thank goodness, in the case of Mueller, we came together and found somebody who both parties at the time felt like could be independent and do a good job of the investigation. So what happened? He starts on this investigation, and for 2 years, guess what all of us do? We guess about what he's going to come up with. And you turn on, I don't care, you pick Fox or you pick CNN, and for 2 years, they spent the majority of their time talking about their guess about what he was going to find. And every little rumor that came out, we all had to go down this little hole with. And guess what? We make really lousy judges because we don't have the data that Mueller has. He's interviewed, he's subpoenaed, he's professional. And so during that 2-year period of time, I kept advocating of, look, let's make sure the investigation is not interfered with, and then let's just stay out of the way and stop guessing about what he's going to come up with. Now we've got the exact same situation almost. People just can't wait to speculate about what's still in there that's coming out. And my response to that is, hang on, let's wait, let's see what's in there. I think that the vast majority, if not all of it, will become public. And I'm confident that the only thing that won't become public, it truly is okay not becoming public. And what I mean by like that is you have grand jury testimony, you have people who are accused of things and not found guilty. I think reasonable minds can come together on which of that should be shared. It has really nothing to do with the president. And I think as long as the American people feel like that process was impartial, then we get this report, we read it, and then we can all step back and say, okay, great. Now can we move on with the country?
Awesome. And let me just, it is so cool in such a Republican area for you to be so pragmatic and level-headed. Like, let's give John a round of applause for that guy. Honestly, that is so cool.
Can we all catch the irony that being level-headed gets you an applause?
I know, it's sad. I grew up in Canada, and I actually probably tells you more about my stage presence on here every week than anything. But I grew up in Canada. I never understood U.S. politics. I don't know if I still do, but like, it is just so cool. Anyway, very cool, very cool. Got next question is one of the pervasive issues facing our country appears to be the blatant and often deliberate ignorance on issues we disagree with, i.e., economics, immigration, climate change. What do you think is the best way for citizens to combat this problem peacefully and rationally?
Thank you. That's an awesome question. Let me just say before, and then I'll answer that question, that one of the things I regret the most about what happens in Washington is we do a terrible job of telling you when we actually get along and do things well. And let me give you a couple of examples. We just passed judicial reform, bipartisan judicial reform. That's a big deal. That is a major deal. And we heard a little bit of it in the press, but not much. It was gone, right? Almost the day it happened. We passed major opioid legislation last year. We passed 67 opioid bills. One of the biggest problems we've got in the country right now is this opioid issue. And I had a chance to preside on the House floor while we were debating these opioid bills. And the debates were very simple. There were 67 bills. So the Republicans would stand up and say something like this: these are good bills. We'd like to thank our Democratic colleagues for their help on these bills. We hope you'll support the bills. Then the Democrats would stand up and say something like this: these are good bills. We'd like to thank our Republican colleagues for their help on these bills. We hope you'll vote for these bills. 67 bills, almost unanimous support. We rolled it into one bill because the House can't do, or the Senate can't do 67 bills. They can't do hardly anything. So we rolled it into one bill for them. They passed it on a nearly unanimous vote. It went to the president for his signature. He signed it, and it went into law last year. How many of you read about that in the press? Hardly, right? Isn't that sad? I mean, we worked together. We worked across the aisle. We complimented each other. We did something really significant, and guess what? The press doesn't want to report that. So it is true that we're very dysfunctional on issues like immigration and maybe even climate change. But there's a lot good that happens back there. And I hardly meet a colleague, whether they're Republican or Democrat, that I don't walk away and say, dang, they're a really good person. And they came here for the same reasons that I did. Now, on these difficult issues, and immigration is a perfect example, we become so polarized. And the reality of it is, if you took the average congressperson and randomly picked 5 of us and put us in the room, we would solve immigration in a half hour. It's just not that hard. But these polar opinions come out, and they just keep us from making progress. It's really unfortunate. Am I okay? Because can I share a story? Am I going too long?
Go for it.
Okay.
They'd rather hear you than me. They hear from me every week.
Yeah, sure. You pay them.
I know. Every time they laugh, I just have to think,
Ting, ting.
They're being paid. They're employees. They don't think you're that funny.
So we got into this shutdown a couple of months ago, and it was really stupid. It was just really non-productive, cost the American people a lot of money, and it was really frustrating because it kind of came down to President Trump and Nancy Pelosi, and nobody else could do anything about it. And one day I was in an elevator going to vote, and there were 3 Republicans in the elevator. We got in on the first floor, and we vote on the second floor. And a Democrat stepped into the elevator on the first floor, turned around and looked at us and said, "Would you take X for the wall?" And she threw out a dollar amount. And we said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, will you call it something besides the wall?" And we said, "Yeah." And then I can't remember, she threw out 2 or 3 things. Literally between the first floor and the second floor, we had it solved, right? And that's my point is most of us are reasonable, practical people wanting to get things done, and we get caught in these traps. Let's be honest, I think some of the traps were put there on purpose by our forefathers because they do want it to be difficult. You don't want Congress just changing legislation every time Democrats come in or Republicans come in, and it's difficult. Now, the question that I'm finally answering is kind of what all of you can do, and I think what you can all do is demand civility, demand and reward people that are doing a good job, and speak out and pass out campaign flyers for them. Get involved in politics. Think about running for politics. All of your city councils, all of your school boards, they need good people. And I'd really suggest you guys think about being one of those people.
That is awesome. How are we doing on time, Brian? Okay. Okay, this is a question. I voted for you when you were running for mayor of Provo because of your lack of concern for the status quo in political and party politics. That seemed to all change when you were running in your primary for the House, as you seemingly had to change or compromise your record in order to play to the conservative Utah base. What needs to happen in American politics for candidates to not feel they have to pander to their respective bases? That's not a loaded question, so just
I would
go for it.
Yeah, I'm going to actually tell you that I'm guilty and that you're right. And it was a very uncomfortable thing for me. And I don't think I navigated it well as I moved. I think I told you earlier on that as I moved from nonpartisan mayor, where we were building parks and talking about music and doing fun things, to partisan immigration, budgets, and all of those things. And there was this massive pressure to conform to a stereotype in order to get past that. And I think if you watched my second election, hopefully you saw an evolution of me where I wasn't as willing to play that game. And I actually had a lot of fun in the debate. My opponent was the same opponent the second time around, and I had a lot of fun because he kept saying, I'm the true conservative. I'm the true conservative. You're not. You're a Nancy Pelosi liberal. And finally, in the debate, I just looked at him and I said, to an extremist, everybody looks like a liberal. And it really felt good.
Boom, roasted.
Yeah, it really felt good. And so if you were one of those that watched me go through that process, don't give up on me. Stay there with me. Just know it's really hard to navigate and that I'm actually getting better at it.
Awesome. That is awesome. Okay. It feels like too many laws and policies are controlled by an out-of-touch federal government. What can we as citizens do to take back control on a local level of things that matter the most to us? Now, you already covered some of that, but I think a good question.
Let me just reemphasize to get involved. I think as much as I admire you and your the era that you're growing up in, if I had one thing that I'd tell you to do differently, it would be to be more politically involved, to vote. I mean, we could start with that right now. It'd probably embarrass all of us to say how many of you voted and make you raise your hands. We're not going to make you. But that's the most fundamental thing, is not just to vote, but to cast an informed vote. Let me give you an example. In the district right next to mine, this last election, Mia Love and Ben McAdams, it was decided by 700 votes. 700,000 constituents decided by 700 votes. Are you telling me that you guys couldn't have made a difference in that race? Absolutely, right? And so use your tools. You guys have these amazing tools, the social media, the ability to analyze data and help the candidates that you like win and get into office. And you'll be surprised how you can change a race. My first race for mayor was decided by 500 votes. BYU students, we used to have this dialogue with BYU students all the time. They don't vote. And then they complain about the issues in Provo City. You tell me that you couldn't get 500 students to vote in every election and turn every single election in the city of Provo to favor BYU issues? Absolutely. And so I would start with that. I would pick candidates that you like, that represent you, and I'd get behind them with all of your might and share your expertise and do everything from hang door flyers to write software for them, to help them with social media. And pretty soon you'll find that you're controlling the dialogue far more than you think that you can.
Awesome. Next one we have, the U.S. is in danger of losing our advantage in our technical field due to the current administration's reduction of research funding and a broken immigration system, specifically as it relates to work visas and green cards for skilled workers. What can you do to help break this impasse and help businesses with work visas increase in H-1B visas and address the backlogs in visa processing?
Also, very good point. Specifically, what can I do? There's a bill in Congress right now that I'm a co-sponsor. We co-sponsored it last year, didn't get through. I've co-sponsored it again this year. These highly skilled visas, which I think would impact you all a lot, have a serious problem, and that is that we have a country cap. And so if you're from a country where a lot of people don't necessarily want to come, it's relatively easy for you to come in and get a green card and stay for a long time. If you're from India or China, you'll spend decades and decades and decades and not have that same thing. So We're trying to change that by eliminating those country caps. That's one specific. On an overall basis, one of the things that's very important to me in immigration reform is the fact that we have qualified workers who will come into our country, pay taxes, obey the laws, do everything we ask them to do, and in many cases go back home. And we're not letting them in. And it's hurting businesses of all stripes. Agriculture is just dying because they can't get the people in. I'll tell you something that's really kind of fun to me. There's a congressman from Texas. His name's Henry Cuellar. I had a chance to travel with him. He's a Democrat. And he told me that his father was a cherry picker in Utah. Now, how cool is that? Second generation, first generation cherry picker in Utah, second generation congressman. And I think that's what we miss when we shut the door and are blind to what's really best for us. Now, immigration is complicated and there are so many agendas. And the best thing I think we can do is kind of set some of those aside and just say what is best for us as a country. And I think we'll get to the right answer.
Fantastic. You're so level-headed. It's like
applause.
It's awesome. It seriously is. Like, you're too likable, man. Okay, we got one more, and I think it's pretty good.
Another hard one?
I don't know. We'll let you be the judge. What is your position on legislation such as FOSTA, SESTA, that reduces safe harbor protections for companies that host online content? I don't even know what that means.
Who wants to explain that?
Okay, come on up, dude. Was this your question? Oh, you don't have to say, but you know it. Okay, this is our resident linguistic specialist.
He's going to translate these terms.
Yeah. Okay.
Here. Oh, thanks. Yeah. So basically, the Communication Decency Act of 1993 or 6 or whatever, basically said that if you're an online service provider, if you're an online website, you can host people's content and not be held liable for the content they post. So if you're Facebook and somebody posts really awful things or they deal in like sex trafficking, Facebook's not going to be held accountable for that, at least legally. What SESTA FOSTA do is they like target specifically sexual trafficking, and they say you can be held liable. So recently, Backpage was this website where a lot of sexual trafficking was happening, especially for underage people. And like something like 40% of like cases went through this website and were posted online. And they recently got shut down. A part of Craigslist got shut down. But people are worried that the safe harbor for like tech companies of being able to post whatever you want, deal with whatever communication you want, is going to be threatened by that.
Yeah, when I think of this, I think of like Reddit's an interesting case where like they have a ton of good, but then there's just these crazy subreddits that like you just like a rational person wouldn't think should be a legal thing, right? Yeah. Thank you so much. Give them a round of applause, guys.
So, you gonna run for Congress? Yeah, good. Now there was a bill, and I'd have to go back and look it up last year, that actually we did pass through the House that did hold websites accountable if there was human trafficking or sex trafficking on it, and they had an ability to know it. And that was the important thing. And this gets into a very difficult thing, and you're going to see a lot of discussion about how to regulate the internet and privacy issues and all of these issues. And we've seen that the internet can be used for amazing good, and we've seen that internet can be used for something as sick and as evil as sex trafficking and human trafficking. And the role of Congress is to somehow navigate this with, remember we talked about the proper amount of regulation that ensures that none of us are participating in something as terrible as sex trafficking, and yet doesn't stop the innovation of the internet. We're seeing this right now with net neutrality. I suspect that's a big issue to all of you. And we're trying to wrestle as Congress is, how there's not a congressman I know, and there's some, I'm sure, but doesn't want the principles of net neutrality. The question is, how much regulation do we apply to make sure that you have net neutrality? On one hand, we can absolutely guarantee you net neutrality if we force everybody to do certain things. That's a little heavy-handed. We can 99% guarantee you net neutrality if we do some things. And you have to decide as a government where you're going to be on that continuum of this. And this is probably a good example. So I don't have a perfect answer for the question other to say then my job is to find that very, very difficult line between regulating and not stifling innovation.
Awesome. Well, I have one more question. So you've got 490 people probably here right now, average age 28. You have an amazing career both in the private sector and politics. You gave everybody some advice on how we can be active politically and help change things. But what's just like general advice? We're all, even myself, we're all young in our careers and we got a long ways to go. And what advice would you give everybody out here?
Wow. Do I have an hour?
Sure.
No.
I don't think your staff would agree, but
yeah. I think my advice would be a couple of layers. One is, I think in life, and I referred to this when I was talking about what the success of what we do here in the Valley is that I was always willing to work just a little bit harder than the next guy and get to the office just a couple of minutes earlier than the next guy. And my mom used to teach me this concept that an A in school is only that much harder than a B. We do a lot of work to get to a B, and those who will do that much get to the A. And I think, whether you're trying to be a good employee here or successful in life, there's a lot of you who will do the work to get to a B, and there's very few of you who will do that work to get to an A. And you will differentiate yourself with your employer, with your peers, if you're one of those who are known as just somebody that's going to come in and do A work. And then the second thing is just to go for it. You're in one of the things I admire about the stage of life you're in is you can afford to make mistakes. You can afford to have something not go right. I can't, right? I've now got 6 kids. I've got all these obligations and responsibilities. I've passed that point in my life where I can take a lot of risk. And so I would say, don't look back and have any regrets of something that you passed up.
That's awesome. My mom said the exact same thing to me.
A's?
She said the difference between a B and an A. This is like when I'm 5th grade. I'm working on this dumb poster for school. I'm like, Mom, it's 11 p.m. What am I doing? She goes, the difference between an A and a B is 10%, Eric. Are you really not willing to give 10% more to get to the grade you want? So it's cool. Awesome. Guys, let's give John Curtis, Representative John Curtis, a round of applause.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
This is awesome. Okay. Well, I think we're at time, right? Okay. Again, you are awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for letting me be here.
Well, and again, I'm going to speak on behalf of everybody. Thank you for being such a fantastic representative of Utah. I think that sometimes Utah gets I think there's just especially the people in this audience, I think there's just a lot of pragmatism and rationality. Is rationality a word? No. There's just, I think people that are, I'm 33, people my age and younger, whether we're Republicans, Democrats, independents, whatever, I just think people are starting to realize that there's a certain power in just being rational. And I think you represent that better than anybody I could think of. So
thank you. That's very kind. It's an honor to be here with you. I just love what you're doing. Those of you who are doing this are what really makes the wheels of the country go around. Sometimes in Washington, we think it's us, but I know darn well that it's you and the hard work that you do. Thanks. And let's do it again. Okay?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Representative Curtis. Okay, guys, that's it. Anything else, Brian? Okay, thanks so much, guys. Again, give them a round of applause.
Thank you.
It's been fantastic. So good. So good. What? No. Oh, real quick, for those of you who are starting this week, get ready. Next week, you're going to present, and it is grueling, so study up.
What was all of it for? We don't talk anymore like we used to. I just hope you're lying next to somebody who knows how to love you like me. Must be a good reason that you're gone. Every now and then I think you might want me to come show up at your door.